Hello, everyone. Welcome to Just Transition Talk Series Part 42. Our guest speaker for today is Dr. Jeffrey Broadbent. He's a Ph.D. from Harvard University and is an Emeritus Professor in the Department of Sociology, University of Minnesota. He specializes in comparative political sociology with a focus on culture and networks. His seminal book, Environmental Politics in Japan, Networks of Power and Protest, garnered significant recognition, earning the Best Book Award from the section on Environmental Sociology of the American Sociological Association in 2000 and the Masayoshi Ohira Memorial Prize in Japan in 2001. He is also the co-author of Comparing Policy Networks, Labor Politics in the US, Germany, and Japan. In 2007, Dr. Broadbent founded the Compound, that is Comparing Climate Change Policy Networks project, which examines the politics of emissions reduction across 25 societies. Additionally, he co-edited East Asian Social Movements, Power, Conflict, and Change in a Dynamic Region. Dr. Broadbent has an extensive body of work, including numerous journal articles and book chapters reflecting his broad contributions to the field of sociology and environmental politics. Today, he will talk about his recent publication, Power and Theory, toward a multidimensional explanation of the dynamic political field, where he introduced an innovative framework, integrated structural analysis, ISA, which is a landmark contribution to political sociology. With this, I request Professor Broadbent to start his talk.
Well, thank you very much. I am so delighted to be able to be here with you via Zoom and present this talk, especially to an Indian audience. And I really thank the Just Transition Research Center for inviting me to present this talk. And I have had a long fondness for Indian culture and actually traveled to India first in 1972 when I studied meditation and yoga at an ashram in Rishikesh and Rajpur. And since then, I have actually in 1986, I met my wife in India at the occasion of the International Sociological Association meeting that was held in Delhi. And she was coming from the Department of Sociology at the University of Minnesota to give a talk. And I met her and I told her, hey, I've just been hired by your department in 1986. And later on, we got married and have lived happily ever since. So India has very many fond memories for me. And in particular, relating to this talk deals with a lot of abstract theory, talking about general concepts and principles and not about specific concrete details of some political event or social event or another. It rather deals in general theory. And I think that the Indian philosophical tradition, going way back to the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali and many other wonderful sources, have always fostered a great understanding of abstract thinking and abstract analysis. And this is quite different from the Americans, where I am situated here, where most people think in very substantive and pragmatic terms and don't like abstract theory very much, with the exception of a few great theorists. So I'm hoping that my talk will seem compatible and resonate with you more readily than with the more narrowly empiricist American scene. So I look forward to your questions and comments and critiques at the end of the talk. So the talk is a unified field theory, toward a unified field theory of sociopolitics. And it deals with integrating theories to explain the political process. And the paper, if you haven't seen it yet, is available down here at this link, which has also been circulated on the invitation list. And this current talk will build on that paper, but go beyond it somewhat in its thinking as I'm preparing for a part 2 of the paper, which deals more with its implications for the analysis and understanding of whole social systems and societal systems and the operation of politics within these whole systems. So basically the talk deals with our concepts of theory versus explanation versus evidence. And as human beings, we observe the world and wonder why things happen as they do. We think up explanations, and if others agree, those explanations become accepted among a group of people as fact. Now, our early explanations attributed events to the supernatural will of God or the gods or nature spirits. But science gradually has discovered causality within nature and finding out how something within nature causes something else within nature. The scientific mentality makes suppositions, what we call theories, about what causes what, and then seeks confirming or disconfirming evidence in the reality that can be measured and assessed and somehow grasped and to use to provide evidence for the validity or the inaccuracy of our supposition or theory. Well, this approach works well in the physical world, but scientific theory testing has deepened our understanding of the laws governing physical phenomena, but human society is more complex because its atoms, people, think, feel, and decide, both individually and collectively, about how to react to circumstances, including physical circumstances. Physical laws bear upon people, but beyond that, we create a bewildering variety of social and cultural patterns, impelled by many additional non-physical factors. So human society is more complex than the laws of physics and chemistry, complex enough as those are. So we can analyze a human society in general, starting from an abstract picture of the environment. And within that, human beings evolved and created societies. So here's the blue box representing a society within the environment, a typical model of a society. And first of all, humans had to adapt to the physical environment and learn how to gain resources and sustenance and use and utilize that environment. But of course, these days, there are so many of us and we're utilizing the environment so heavily that we're actually degrading that environment and its capacity to sustain life, as we see in the climate crisis. So adaptation takes on whole new meanings of coping with this second layer of environmental feedback beyond what we're used to. We have to mitigate our effects upon the environment. But that's not all that human beings in society or individually do. They also, as a group and as individuals, construct ways that they can attain goals. And in groups, we construct ways to coordinate our collective effort. We create hierarchies and authority. In a word, we create politics because control of the group and what it does becomes a subject to dispute and contestation. Thirdly, another basic function that is typically found and met in human society in one shape or another is what we call integration. And that is where people come to feel that they belong with each other and more readily help and coordinate with each other through social relations, knowing other people, as we say, the word knowing, having a lot of emphasis. Family, established norms of behavior as to how we should do things and build communities. And that's different from the kind of more authoritative political coordination that occurs. And finally, the fourth function is symbolic agreement, where we have some means of communication and of sharing our values and beliefs and emotions through language and ritual and other means of symbolic communication. In a word, it involves culture. But the origins of culture lie not only in our relations to each other, but also in our ultimate concerns, our spiritual concerns, where people have different ideas about death and the afterlife and God and the soul and spirituality and forms of belief or insight regarding those things, which then feed back into and help create human culture. So it's a very complicated affair. And they interpenetrate and interact with each other, all of these, so that you can't easily separate out one like organization, like a church under emotions and values that doesn't have also aspects of integration where people get to know each other and like each other, and goal attainment where there's a hierarchy and leadership, and adaptation. It has to have economic viability to survive. And all organizations and indeed society as a whole is like that, with this interpenetration. So these aren't easily separable to analyze them separately and look at their contributions. We can make an analytical distinction between these four factors, but in social reality, they interpenetrate each other in complex mixtures, formations, dynamics, processes, with unpredictable results and outcomes. And factors such as complexity, where out of the milling interaction of individuals, new forms of social organization arise unexpectedly without intent or purpose. And chaos, where tiny effects can have massive effects, tiny causes can have massive effects ultimately on the whole system, what we call the butterfly effect. And innovation, agency of individuals, which creates new directions in society. So society is not a functional system seeking equilibrium, but it's an open semi-system evolving over time with unpredictable arrows of causality and feedback loops. And actually, society itself, we think of society as a discrete unit, like a nation state, like Indian society. But actually, human society, while originating in discrete tribal groups, has now spread and encompassed the entire globe, where the interconnections are tying all different societies together in webs of interaction and interdependence, much more than ever before. So really, even to consider a nation society, we need to place it in this global context these days. Well, facing this interpenetration, complexity, chaos, and change with limited cases and limited experimental capacity, social scientists, or those who would try to explain society and politics scientifically, that is, to test their theoretical explanations using evidence, they usually retreat to a small corner of the real world and or the conceptual theoretical world. For instance, they study voting from a rational choice point of view, a theory, or they study protest movements from a resource mobilization point of view. So this is a small slice of reality, both in terms of the substantive objects or phenomena or processes that it studies, one small slice of the whole society, and also one small slice of the possible explanations that could be used, the possible theoretical propositions that could be applied to explaining that, because things quickly get so complicated. So specialization this way has drawn on and reinforced and enhanced and produced many different theories that have fundamentally different assumptions about the causes of societal process and outcomes. I say societal here, meaning to encompass politics, economics, family, culture, and so forth within the society, not the narrow notion of social relations. These theories then become paradigms or ideologies where people using them form schools of like-minded thinkers, and they ignore or demean other schools. So they think that they have a better grasp on truth than some other school. And this leads to a kind of chaos, a shattering of intellectual understanding and theoretical analysis of events in society. Here's the chaos, just some examples of the chaos of theories and their different causal assumptions. Like class theory, derived originally from Marx, posits class exploitation and domination as a material structure in theoretical sense, as its main driving spring of action in society. And in state theory, the state itself imposes political domination. Material interaction, coercive and economic sanctions applied between actors are the main driving spring. Rational choice, individual actors choosing their best means. Institutional theory, that social structures of roles, rules, and norms, like including gender, sexuality, and so forth, are what shape and drive human action. Social exchange, interaction to attain social rewards. Cultural structural theory. Symbolic cultural structures determine action. Symbolic interaction. Interactive, mutual cultural construction of the beliefs about the situation, or rather what drive action. And then at the end here, cultural agency, where actors can reflexively create new beliefs and values that interject new directions into society. So faced with this chaos of theories, how do we choose when we do research, when we want to explain a case of the socio-political process and outcome? Specifically here, focusing on environmental problems. To explain something, we need to go beyond mere description of saying what happened when, and we need to use a theoretical causal explanation to delve into what we think causes what, how A causes B, and so forth. But how can we choose among the diverse theories that each posit different causal mechanisms to be occurring as the main driving springs of a political process? When we recognize the complexity of reality, all the individual theories start to seem too narrow and too partial. So we need to move towards a more comprehensive explanation. To go beyond theoretical narrowness, we need a method that can assess for individual theories and their interactive effects the relative explanatory capacity of the full range of potential causal factors presented by the different theories. And we need to use those to create a multidimensional explanation of the process and the outcome. But how to do that? There's a big obstacle. Is it possible to evaluate the relative explanatory capacity of different theories, even for a single case? Tilly says, we cannot devise a set of general tests which will convincingly establish their relative validity of different theories. So how could we overcome this obstacle? How could we put the different theories on a common ground, measure them by a common measuring rod that would determine their relative validity and explanatory capacity for a given case of political process and outcome that we're studying. The method requires a non-reductive ontology and a pluralist approach to causation, says Philip Gorski. And that means a non-reductive ontology means ontology is the essential elements of being of a phenomenon, what it consists of. And we have to not reduce that social constitution to a single theoretical dimension, non-reductive. So the method must recognize the different dimensions of the reality of society and be open to the possibility of many different causal factors coming in, which would be unknowable in their full interactive complexity, but they conjointly bring about the political field and outcome, and then we would have to devise ways to insert probes, gathering information to try to discern how these different causal factors are interacting with each other. So I propose here the method of integrated structurational analysis, the ISA method. It's integrated because it jointly uses a wide range of theories. It's structurational because it recognizes the interplay of structure and agency, and it's an analysis because it assesses the relative validity with empirical data. And so the method starts off by presenting an analytical framework of the many different theories by their basic axioms or assumptions about how the world works. And it identifies the core causal factor assumed by each theory. It says that a given theory stands on a certain core causal factor that it believes is at work in the real world to cause outcomes. And then it operationalizes or presents a way of measuring each causal factor by its own distinct micro mode of power that would be seen as existing in reality if that theory and causal factor were to be truly at work in the actual process and causing its outcome. So it codes each actor dyad for the relative presence of the different power modes. We have 24 different power modes, and codes hundreds of actor dyads at the micro level of dyadic two-actor interaction in the political process over time. And then it uses this data to assess the relative validity of the different theories. So this coding of the micro power modes, of which we have 24, representing 24 different major theories, the coding of them enables us to see which of the theories' causal factors is actually operating in the reality at the micro level. And then that data enables us to say, well, in this case, at this time and point, this causal factor, this is evidence that this causal factor is actually operating. This is a basic scientific view of seeking evidence for a theory. And then in the analytical framework of theories, each theory stands on a distinct assumption or axiom about how the social world works in its posited causal factor. And these foundational axioms differ along two basic dimensions, which I call the malleability dimension and the tangibility dimension. And in the malleability dimension, axioms differ, first of all, in their most simple categorization, they differ by structure, interaction, and agency. And in the tangibility dimension, they differ by material, social, and cultural media. And structure, in the malleability dimension, structure means that some outside forces impose behavior and belief upon the actors in this dyad. So it comes from outside and compels them to behave and think in certain ways. Interaction means that rather than structure causing that, for instance, in a bureaucracy, an actor will follow the rules and the mandates usually. So that's a kind of structure imposing itself upon the actor and on their relations with other actors. But in interaction, the actors get to more interactively negotiate and bargain and create the kind of power relationship that they're involved in. And in agency form, the individual actor comes up with new forms of behavior and new ways of influencing other actors that then spread out and influence other actors. Now, compared to that, in the tangibility dimension, material, social, cultural, this is the old material ideal debate in sociology and social sciences, where we wonder, are people and societies really driven by material? What really drives them? Is it the pursuit of money, material factors, the extraction of resources from the environment and so forth? Or are they also, or even more so, driven by common ideas and beliefs, like a common religion or a common ideology about how the world should be, or something like that? And so this tangibility dimension says, well, maybe all these things could be interacting and existing at the same time in different measures. And in between material and culture, I've instituted here social, which means that people are driven by social relations, the recognition of status, the desire for inclusion, and so forth. And so these two dimensions define what I call the analytical framework of theories. And here's this analytical framework. So you can see here the two dimensions of tangibility and malleability that define the different essential axioms of the different theories. And then we have them divided here into material, social, and cultural on the tangibility dimension, on structure, interaction, and agency on the malleable dimension. And in the cells, then, we get different theory schools. I'm not dividing them into specific theories here yet, but theory schools like Marxism theory and class theory and state theory would be emphasizing material factors of coercion and economic inducement in a structural way that imposes its logic upon the actors in the society. Whereas if we take the opposite extreme, cultural agency, down here, a theory would say that action is creative. Individuals create new ways of thinking and believing, like a religious prophet may do so, and interject that into the society, which creates movements and creates change. So you can see how diametrically opposed in their beliefs about social causality these two theoretical schools are. And then, similar to the theories I explained before, they fit into these different boxes, emphasizing different basic media of exchange, people operating through one of these media of exchange to, like, a cultural idea or a discourse to convince another person, versus a role of money and material incentives to convince another person, and everything in between. So that's why we have here a multi-dimensional range of theories, all of which can be potentially incorporated into a multidimensional explanation of a political process, in this case, and its outcome. So we need to expand both of these dimensions. And in expanding the malleability dimension, we can expand it using 4 types of power that have been discovered in research on power. The power of macrostructures, the power over, where A controls B, power with, where A cooperates with B, and power to, where the individual acts with creative agency. And expanding the tangibility dimension, on the other hand, there's more specific media through which actors convince and persuade other people. And this material includes coercive and economic, as I've discussed, the use of the state and businesses, social norms, as I've discussed, and the cultural dimension includes knowledge, legitimacy, and emotions. And I put knowledge in red because it's a little different. It's a different arrangement than the one I presented in the paper, where I called it expertise and put it under material. This is a more comprehensive way of looking at it. Knowledge is how what we believe is structured or interactive or created, and legitimacy, what we believe is to be right and proper, and then emotions. So when we expand that table, we get this huge table with specific theories in each cell, labeled with their specific authors in most cases. And we don't have time to go into this, but I hope you get the general idea that we're dividing up these theories and then we're assigning them their basic causal factor here. Say Gramsci deals with the causal factor of ideological hegemony. And then, so I'll just have to skip this and leave it for you to peruse in the paper. The basic point, though, is that for each of these theories, each one implies in its causal factor, its central causal factor, a micropower mode that can be found among actors in the case. And then the relative proportion of the different micropower modes indicates the relative validity of the different theories. And this is our measuring rod that overcomes the objection that Tilly raised that the different theories cannot be measured and compared for their relative validity in studying a given case. So here's the analytical framework which lays out the specific micromode of power that's attached to each theory. And we use the same analytical framework, and then in each cell, like here, economic Marxist theory is a structural economic theory, and its micromode is that class structure controls the state, and so political wealthy actors make contributions to politicians and control their policy positions that way, would be the micromode, and so on. And we don't have time to go into all this, but you can study it at your leisure if you wish. So the data generating method is that we use the fieldwork data to analyze, to identify and analyze key actor interactions. Actors here meaning organizations that are usually active in the political process. And these affect the outcome. And we code them using extensive fieldwork information, interviews and texts over the time span of the case. So now I just want to show you the results of this method in an illustrative case study. The case study concerns contentious politics over the siting of a polluting industry. The political process lasted about 27 years, and it was located in southern Japan. I conducted extensive field work on this and many interviews with organizational actors from the national to the local level, consisting of government agencies, political parties, businesses, unions, protest movements, and also tapping into public opinion as a kind of quasi-actor. And I coded 256 dyads, actor pairs, affecting the outcome. So if we were to analyze all that data, it could generate power networks among the engaged actors that appear in synchronic, that is for the whole field in one image, or diachronic, changing over time sequentially for 9 time periods as I divide the 27 years. And we can analyze the power modes operating in the field in depth, showing the composition of the field, whether it's more cultural, social or material factors and work and so forth. And we can show the relative dominance and interaction of the 24 modes synchronically or diachronically over time. And this full analysis would permit the most precise indication of the relative validity of the different theories. However, in this study, I just, for purposes of conciseness and as an illustrative case, the present analysis shows the sum totals of the 6 tangibility modes, such as coercion, economic, normative, knowledge, legitimacy, and emotional. And it verifies the theories which are based upon those 6 different types of tangibility modes, without considering here their structural differences, structurational differences, such as structure, interaction, and agency. And I show them in the synchronic and diachronic aspects, which provides a not as precise as it could be, a kind of fuzzy indication of the changing relative validity of theories. So here's the causal presence of the 6 tangibility media in the whole field. If we add them all up, legitimacy is the most effective causal factor, causing actors to behave and causing the outcomes. Next comes coercive, then economic, then expertise or knowledge, emotional, and normative. So it already shows us that we need a multidimensional explanation of the interaction of these factors in order to explain these political dynamics and outcomes. Then we have figure 2. It shows how these tangibility media, in their causal effect, the ones that have the actual causal effect of the outcome, change over the 3-year periods of the case history. So you can see that here, emotional is the green, legitimacy is the gray, normative is this tiny light gray, expert is the green, coercive is the orange, and economic is the blue. And you can see that there's a shifting causal impact of these different types of theorized effects or different theories over time. So we can't really summarize it as being caused by one theoretical perspective. And if we look at the historical details, we find, bringing in the historical details, we find 4 basic turning points where there are path-setting events, and they have their own particular sets of modes of power relations in these particular periods. And in period 1, the prefectural governor promised a great industrial growth plan to the citizens that would bring manufacturing jobs. So this was a dominance by the structural legitimacy power of the governor to convince the citizens based upon traditional Japanese culture, which gives a lot of credibility and legitimacy to an authority figure like the governor. So it validates what we would call the symbolic realism theory. However, in period 3, central big business pulls a fast bait and switch routine on the local governor and people and substitutes a raw materials processing plant that mostly employed technical experts from the big cities. And so it didn't bring those kind of jobs they were hoping for. Instead, it started to build polluting steel and oil refineries. So here was dominance by a structural economic power, which validates a Marxian class theory for that period. But then in period 6, the peak of power usage, the movement protests the expansion of the polluting raw materials industrial project. And the governor says, well, we'll wait until 3 conditions are achieved, which means the consensus of the citizens and the stopping of fighting among the citizens and an environmental assessment. So that is the dominance of symbolic interaction theory, where a new understanding is worked out. And then in period 9, the governor says, well, we've now fulfilled the 3 conditions and we approve the construction of the new sites. However, due to global opportunities, central big business abandons the industrial plans in the prefecture, and therefore the movement wins a de facto victory. So this validates a kind of rational choice theory of business decisions going for their better markets. And so if we look at this historical theoretical timescape of the case, the dominant theory here is symbolic realism in period 2, where this, and here where legitimacy is very strong in period 1 in particular. The Marxian class dominates in period 3, symbolic interaction at the height of the action dominates in period 6, and then rational choice dominates in period 9. But this is only a summary of the main effects, but there's actually very complicated effect of interaction of factors at each of these turning points, which we can't go into here. So in conclusion, compared to existing uses of theory and evidence, the ISA method permits a closer approximation to a unified field theory to explain process and outcome of a political case. It shows the relative validity of different causal theories combined in interactive composites that transform across time at different historical junctures, producing this changing causal theoretical timescape. It's not a single unified field theory, but it can help explain climate political processes and outcomes. And if we compare it to the ideal of a unified field theory as proposed in physics, rather the ISA integrates multiple theories into a single explanatory framework, but recognizes the dynamic interplay between structure, agency, and interaction, and material, social, and cultural media. And so it moves beyond the narrow theoretical silos toward a multidimensional explanation, provides a causal timescape, highlighting shifts over time in the dominant theories. And while it's not a static, complete, unified field theory, it lays the groundwork for better interdisciplinary synthesis. Thank you. That's the end. So let's open it up now to questions and answers.
Oh,
Can you switch on your camera, please? We can't see you.
Professor Broadbent?
Yes.
Yeah, can we kindly request you to switch on your camera so that we can see you?
What is that?
Can you kindly switch on your camera?
Oh, switch on the camera. Okay.
Yeah.
There I am. Sorry. There I am.
Yeah, so thank you so much for this enlightening talk and deepening our understanding of theories and how we can use multiple theories simultaneously.